Right, so this is video notes for section 9.4, factoring the GCF. So the GCF, remember, is the greatest common factor. Remember, a factor is just a number that can be divided evenly into another given number. So, for example, the factors of 24 are numbers that can be divided into 24 evenly. So we have 1 times 24, 1 can be divided into 24, 24 can be divided into 24. 2 times 12 equals 24, so 2 can be divided into 24, 12 can be divided into 24. We also have 3 times 8 and 4 times 6. The factors of 60 would be 1 times 60, 2 times 30, 3 times 20, 4 times 15, and 5 times 12, as well as 6 times 10. Alright, so the greatest common factor of two numbers is the greatest or the highest number that is a factor of both. So we see here 12 is the greatest or the highest number that is a factor of both 24 and 60. So the GCF, or greatest common factor, of 24 and 60 is equal to 12. So, how do we find the greatest common factor of two variables? So think about, if we have x to the third, the term x to the third is the same thing as x times x times x. X times y is equal to x times y. Right? So finding the GCF of x to the third and xy, we're looking for what is the most things that we can find in common between x to the third and xy. So we can pull an x out of both x to the third and xy. There's more x's here in x to the third, but since we can't pull out any more out of xy, there's only one x that we can pull out of both, so that's the greatest common factor. So the GCF of x to the third and x times y equals just x. So next, let's look at finding the GCF of number 3, x squared times y to the 6th times z to the 3rd, and x to the 10th, y, z to the 4th. So again, I'm going to write out the factorization of each of these terms. So y squared, or x squared, y to the 6th, z to the 3rd is equal to x times x, since we have x squared, y times y times y times y times y times y 6 times, since we have y to the 6th, and z to the 3rd gives us z multiplied by itself 3 times. So go ahead and pause and write out the factorization of x to the 10th, y, z to the 4th. Then unpause and see if you match with me. Alright, so I multiplied together 10 x's since I have x to the 10th, 1 y since I just have a y here, and 4 z's since I have z to the 4th. So, see if you match your answers with mine, and if not, pause and figure out why. But to find the GCF of these two terms, x squared, y to the 6th, z to the 3rd, and x to the 10th, y, z to the 4th, we want to find what all we can find in common between these two factorizations. So here I have 2 x's, and in my second term I have 10 x's, so the greatest thing that we can pull out of both is just 2 x's. So I'm going to have x squared, or 2 x's. The greatest amount of y's I can pull out of both, here I have 6 y's, and here I only have 1 y, so I can pull out only 1 y out of both. I just times y. And I have 3 z's here and 4 z's here, so the greatest amount of z's I can pull out of both is 3. I have 1, 2, 3 z's here, and 1, 2, 3 z's here, so I can pull out z to the 3. So my greatest common factor of x squared, y 6, z 3, and x to the 10th, y, z to the 4th is x squared, the highest amount of x's I can pull out, y, that's the highest amount of y's I can pull out, and z to the 3rd. So go ahead and pause and try checkpoints number 4 and 5 on your own, pulling out the greatest common factors of two terms that have variables. When you've finished, unpause and move on to number 6 and 7. We are going to do those together. So in number 6, it asks us to find and factor out the greatest common monomial factor of 24x to the third plus 60xy. So what we're looking for here is the greatest common factor of each of these two terms. So my first term is 24x to the third, and my second term is 60xy. So now we have numbers and variables in our terms. So what we're going to do is look at the numbers and variables separately. So first, just look at the GCF of 24 and 60, which if you look back to number 1, the greatest common factor of 24 and 60 is 12. Next, find the greatest common factor of the variables. So we have x to the third and xy, which if we look back to number 2, the greatest common factor of x to the third and xy is just x. So the greatest common factor of these terms is going to be the greatest common factor of the numbers, which is 12, times the greatest common factor of the variables, which is just x. So 12x is the greatest common factor from each of these terms. So we found the greatest common factor, but it also asks us to factor it out. So what that means is we are going to set up 24x to the third plus 60xy. We're going to factor out this greatest common factor. So 12x is going to go outside the parentheses, and then inside of the parentheses I'm going to rewrite my polynomial 24x to the third plus 60xy. And since I'm factoring out this 12x, I need to divide 12x out of each of my terms. So what that leaves us with is 12 times x times 24 over 12 reduces to 2, and x to the third over x to the first reduces to x to the second power, plus 60 over 12 reduces to 5, and x over x cancels each other out, leaving us with just a y. So once we have factored out our greatest common factor, our final answer will be 12x times the polynomial 2x squared plus 5y. So look now at number 7. We're going to do another example. Again, it asks us to find and factor out the greatest common monomial factor, or the greatest common term, out of 3a squared minus 18a to the fourth. So we're finding the greatest common factor of each of those terms. So first term is 3a squared, and our second term is negative 18a to the fourth. So again, we're going to look at this greatest common factor of our numbers, 3 and minus 18, and our variables, a squared and a to the fourth, separately. The greatest common factor of 3 and minus 18 is 3, because 3 divides into 3 and 3 divides into 18. The greatest common factor of a squared and a to the fourth is going to be a squared, because we can pull 2 a's out of a squared and 2 a's out of a to the fourth. So the greatest common factor of these terms is the greatest common factor of the number 3 times the greatest common factor of the variables, a squared. So 3a squared. So next we are going to factor this out of the polynomial. So 3a squared minus 18a to the fourth is going to be equal to, we factor out our greatest common factor, 3a squared, and we are going to divide that out of each of our terms. So we have 3a squared over a squared minus 18a to the fourth over a squared. So we want to reduce this, which gives us 3a squared on the outside times 3a squared over 3a squared. That is going to simplify to 1. So here we are going to leave a 1. When it simplifies, it doesn't disappear, it simplifies to 1. We have minus 18 over 3 gives us reduces to 6. We have minus 6. And a to the fourth over a squared reduces. Remember, when we have exponents dividing, we are subtracting. So we have a to the fourth minus 2. So we have a squared. So our final answer, once factored out, is 3a squared times 1 minus 6a squared. So go ahead and do the checkpoint numbers 8 and 9, where you are factoring out the greatest common monomial factor. So again, you have to find and factor out that greatest common factor. And that is all you're responsible for tomorrow.